Hi, this is Gary Zacharias, and you're listening to the Apologist Bookshelf. You know, just to make things interesting, I did a recent podcast on something called the God Question, and then I've done a podcast recently on the God Conversation. So, you ready? This is one called the God Questions, plural, the God Questions. Hal Seed is the author. Hal's a good guy. I've met Hal, and I like him a lot. He's a pastor in San Diego County, and he's got this book that says, subtitled, Exploring Life's Great Questions About God. And he does. It's not a heavy, intensive, complete, deep dive into these things, but it's a really good book that you could give friends who have some questions. So here's how they deal with it. Hal's got a chapter on, is God real? And then, is the Bible true? Do all roads lead to heaven? How can a good God allow suffering? Which is right, evolution or creation? And then the biggie, what happens when I die? Now, this book is set up to be used in small groups, so it's really good. It takes those 6 questions and has a Bible study section for each one of those. So that could be really helpful in case you're thinking about working with a small group and you're wondering, gosh, I hate to be in charge and not know what to ask or what to say. This book prepares you. You can just walk your way right through the book with these small group discussion guides. Okay, well, I would like to look at the question number 3, which is, do all roads lead to heaven? And he says one of the biggest questions that he hears has to do with exclusivity. I mean, some people say Christianity is too narrow. And they say, what kind of God's going to limit people to just one way of getting into heaven? Wouldn't he let everybody who's well-intentioned join him in the afterlife? Can't he be generous? Can't he be broad-minded enough to let everybody in? Aren't all religions pretty much the same when you get down to it? Wow, how much do you hear that? Yeah, they're all pretty much the same. Well, Hal says, actually, all major religions ask for exclusivity, don't they? Sure, each one claims that that way is the only way. And so what he's going to do in this section of the book is to explore the claims and the paths of the world's largest religions. Now, he does a really good job at that. Again, it's not deep, but it's a real good introductory piece to understand these different religions. So he said, some people accuse God of being narrow because he said there's only one way to go to heaven. But Hal tells a story at this point. He said one time he woke up and he had a really bad pain in his midsection. So his wife said, we got to get to the hospital. And it was appendicitis. And the doctor said, we got to have your appendix out. So Hal asked him, is there anything I could do to avoid having an operation? The doctor said, well, not if you want to live. So Hal said, well, that was a narrow answer. But he said, I didn't think the doctor was cold or uncaring because he gave me just one solution to my problem. So the question is God uncaring because he only gives us one solution? So now he's moving on into these different religions. And this is what I thought I would use in this podcast to kind of give a quick once-over the way Hal does it. So first one is Islam. So he tells a little bit about the history of Muhammad being born in Mecca around 570 A.D., and he was in a small caste, a small tribe, and the Arab people at that time were polytheists, believing in a lot of different gods. And now what does he come along and teach? He teaches there's one God, and he recited and then ended up with the Quran, which means the recitation, and it crystallized the Arab language and spread it across the world. So what's their teaching? So Islam, the word itself means submission. So what's a Muslim? Somebody who's submitted. And so how do you submit? Well, there are 5 ways. They call them the 5 pillars. One is the confession that there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his prophet. You have to pray 5 times a day facing Mecca. You're supposed to give alms, roughly 2.5% of their income. There's a fast during the month of Ramadan. That's the 4th thing. You have to refrain from eating, drinking, smoking, and sexual activity during the daylight hours. And then number 5 is perform a pilgrimage. That's a Hajj to Mecca at least once. And so you got to visit certain sites and all. But if you can't afford the trip, that's waived. Well, real quickly, so Muhammad had this new teaching. He came out with it. Well, people in his town of Mecca were not crazy about it, and leaders of his tribe turned against him. So he and his followers went north to it says oasis of Yathrib, and it's known as the Hijra. That's the immigration. So Yathrib was renamed to Medina, and that's the cradle of the Islamic faith. So when he was there, he conducted raids on caravans that were traveling so that he could get more power and improve his position. And then he went after some Jewish tribes that were there and beheaded hundreds of Jews. And he got surrounding Bedouin tribes under his influence, and finally Mecca capitulated to him. In 632, he died. About that time, Islamic power was throughout most of the Arabian Peninsula, and Muhammad had said, make war on the infidels. And so there were victories like crazy all over the place. They conquered North Africa, all the way to the Atlantic, and Spain, and Asia Minor, and Iraq, Iran, parts of India, to the borders of China. I mean, it was like a forest fire. So what's their view of the afterlife? That if you perform the 5 pillars of the faith, that will earn you entrance into paradise. And that's a happy place, right? You're going to recline on couches. There will be fruit. There will be hanging there, bashful virgins there. So then in the afterlife, you also have what are called the jinn, Jinn. They're a class of beings. They're not really angels, but along with the angels and humans, they're one of the 3 wise and intelligent creations of God. So how does it compare with Christianity? Well, both of them are proselytizing religions. They want to spread the word. Muhammad commissioned his followers to bring the world into what they call Dar Islam, the house of Islam. And Christ said, go and make disciples of all nations. Well, Muhammad's way of doing that was sure different than Jesus's. Muslims were commissioned to conquer the world by the sword. Christians are commanded to proclaim the good news of Jesus. And so it's a hugely different way there that you're going to bring people into the faith. All right, then he covers Hindus, right? What do Hindus believe? He says, well, Hindus teach an eternity of lifetimes, followed by what they call moksha, which is a release from the cycle of death and rebirth and death and rebirth and just on. And that's a complete state of self-realization, this moksha. It means emancipate or liberate. And I didn't realize this. Hinduism has what Hal says is around 1 billion followers today. 70% of India follows the Hindu religion. So what are some of their views? So how do they see God? Well, it's really pantheistic. So here's their teaching. Brahman is a universal spirit that's in everything and it's everywhere. It's an impersonal force, though, that governs the universe. It's a pantheistic religion. Pan means all. So Hindus think God is in everything. Brahman is this force, the circle of life. He ordains, it ordains everything, puts everything in its place. Now, they have holy books called the Vedas, 4 of them, and then Upanishads. Those are elaborations on the Vedas. And what's their biggest teaching? The center of it, reincarnation. Reincarnation. So they said the idea is what they call transmigration of souls or reincarnations. So they think all life has some kind of animating force that moves it because of karma into a good or a bad place in the next life. And then they had in the 20th century gurus that started coming into the U.S. and presented their teachings on reincarnation. Now, here's what I think is interesting. Hindus had believed that you could reincarnate better or reincarnate worse, depending what you did in your previous life. So karma could reward you or karma could punish you. But as these Indian gurus came over, they realized Americans are really positive. They're super optimistic. They didn't like the idea of regression. They wanted more. So when Hindus came here, it says they modified the transmigrational highway so it would run only one way, up. Now, you said that's how the New Age movement kind of got its start, that the New Age people believe in reincarnation, but not downward. We're all gods, and the God part of us can't go backward, only forward. He says sometimes they call that cosmic optimism. So the goal of every Hindu is to live a life that merits good karma so they can progress higher and higher. And if they do that well enough, they will advance to the highest level of humanity, and that's a caste of Hindu priests called Brahmin. Now, if a Brahmin, a person, stores up enough karma, eventually he gets elevated completely out of the physical existence into something like semi-godhood, becoming a spirit. Now, if he progresses forward life after life in that spirit life, he can get higher yet. And the ultimate goal of a Hindu is to become pure spirit, becoming one with the Brahman of the universe. Now, that they call that nirvana, which means blown away. So here's the catch. To me, at least, I see this as a catch. Because the Hindu's God is an impersonal force that inhabits everything, if a person achieves nirvana, they become absorbed into the unconsciousness of the universe. They lose all sense of consciousness. So you're not a being anymore. You're not a person anymore. It's kind of like you're a drop in the river, and it goes into the sea, and it just kind of disappears into the sea. But you got to have multiple lifetimes of living well and dying well and being born again. Hal says some Hindu scholars estimate it takes something like 600,000 lifetimes to reach the perfect release point there. So how does Hinduism compare to Christianity? Well, we know pretty well that the Bible teaches everybody has one life, not a lot. So you see that in Hebrews 9, just as people are destined to die once, and after that to face judgment, etc., etc. So that's a hugely different look at the two religions. Plus, I'd just say that when you think about what's your ultimate goal, to reunite with God, a personal being, or do you want to lose yourself and just become totally non-conscious, just a force? Well, I'd rather be me, thank you very much. How about Buddhism? So Hal moves to Buddhism. Buddhism has about half as many adherents, about 500 million, and its founder was Siddhartha Gautama, born around 563 BC, and he was in a high-caste Hindu family, but he didn't like Hinduism as he came to think about it. So about age 40, he walked away from that. He sat under a fig tree, and he became enlightened about the nature of life. And so he was known as the Buddha, which means the enlightened one. So what did he discover? Well, first, God is beyond description. So there's no sense, they don't even know what it is. It's vague, it's pretty fuzzy, so they kind of leave that alone. But here's the key. The Buddha discovered what he calls Four Noble Truths. In other words, this explains life. So number one, suffering is universal. If you're alive, if you're on this earth, you're going to suffer. Yeah, no argument with that. Number two, why do we suffer? Craving. We desire things. And because we desire things, we feel deprived if we don't get the exact things we want. Well, I think that's true too. Number three, the cure for suffering is to eliminate craving. So you got to detach yourself from desires. Now, here's where I'd break with them. I don't see that happening. What does that make humans? It seems like it would make you a non-person if you lost all desires. Anyways, that's the third point. And then the fourth point is, how do you eliminate craving? You have to follow what he calls the Eightfold Path. So you need the right views, the right thought, the right speech, the right behavior, the right occupation, the right effort, right contemplation, and the right meditation. So can you see what you're doing? You have to work your way along this path of getting rid of cravings. So the ultimate goal of Buddhism, get rid of pain and suffering, and you can achieve enlightenment. So that's the idea here. Buddhism doesn't focus on God very much. It focuses on this life and overcoming suffering. And how do you do it? You detach yourself. Now, like Hinduism, Buddhism says that, yeah, there's nirvana, but it's a slight twist. There's no ultimate place. So for a Buddhist, the ultimate destination of the soul is fluid. It actually changes for them from one life to the next. The path to enlightenment is through disengaging from the cares of this world. If God exists, for the Buddhist, who knows? He's an impersonal force. We can't describe him. Let's not even talk about him. Well, Hal then ends that section on Buddhism, comparing it to Christianity, by saying Christianity has a very different view of suffering and detachment. It actually says suffering can be profitable. And think about Jesus. He didn't avoid suffering. Hebrews says because he suffered, he's able to help those who are being tempted. So he can empathize. Jesus can empathize with us. Hebrews says Christ's followers are going to endure hardship as discipline. Romans 5 says suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance, character. And character, hope. And Paul says in 2 Timothy 2, join with me in suffering. So in this way, it's just the opposite of Buddhism. Christ enters into the suffering of the world. He taught his disciples to do the same. Buddha tried to detach, not attach, but detach himself from the suffering. And he taught his disciples to do likewise. So Hal quotes at the end of the section here from Alfred North Whitehead, who said, the Buddha gave his doctrine, Christ gave his life. Yeah, that's really good. Then Hal says, all right, so he's been talking about these other religions. What's the Christian view? Well, the Christians teach that there is one God, he's one person, manifesting himself in three personalities. The central teaching of Christianity, one word, grace. We're separated from God. We're full of sin. We want to unite with God some way. Well, it's called grace. So God, in the Old Testament, introduced the idea of a sin substitute. He asked the Israelites to sacrifice an unblemished lamb because of families' sins. Now, here's the catch. God wants justice. Certainly he does. But he's loving. So he wants more than justice. He wants to extend mercy. Now, how can he do that? How can he be merciful and still be just? So his solution is substitution. So God demands, because he's just, he demands payment for wrongdoing. But to keep us from having to pay that, and we'd be separated from him forever, God stepped down from heaven and paid the price himself. That's grace. And he quotes Titus 3, 4 and 5. I want to share that with you. When the kindness and love of God, our Savior, appeared, he saved us not because of righteous things we had done, but because of his mercy. And at the end of the section here, Hal says, let's think about what happened here. God came up with what Hal calls the substitution solution. But he said there were other solutions that religions have done that don't work. One is isolation. Okay, so in other words, that's the Buddhist view. How can you be okay with God? Well, we don't know that he's out there. So just withdraw yourself. If you can't be touched, you can't be hurt. But we know that doesn't work. Then there's what he calls the repetition solution. And that's what Hinduism says. You just keep repeating life again and again. You get reincarnated, and finally you get enough good karma. But of course, as Hal points out, what's the problem with that? No matter how many chances we get, we're flawed, we're finite. We're going to keep falling short. Exactly. Hal says there's a third way people have tried, and a lot of religions have tried, and that's exertion. So he's got isolation, repetition, and now what does he mean by exertion? Well, he said, look in Genesis 11. People got together. They tried to work their way back to God. What did they do? They built a tower. So they were going to work hard enough to earn their way to heaven. And that, he says, that's the most common problem, or common solution that people have offered. Islam says, practice those 5 pillars. You got to do it. You'll earn your way to paradise. The Mormons do that. Jehovah's Witnesses, others of religions, different religions, have adopted that same strategy. Work. But God's solution is substitution. It's a relational solution based on grace. Yeah, I think that's great. So at the end of the chapter, it said, think about Jesus on the cross. He said, it's finished. This was God's solution to the separation from him. He enforced justice. Yes, he did. He took a life. But the life he took was not ours as his son's. So God grants forgiveness based on the merits of somebody else. Thank goodness. I don't know. When I get honest and I think about my life and I think about what I do, I am so far short of what I even want to be. Forget about matching up with the 10 Commandments. You ever hear people say that? Well, I try to be good. I try to obey the 10 Commandments. I can't even measure up to my own standards, much less the 10 Commandments. I'm always disappointing myself. So as he ends the chapter, Hal quotes from John 1:12, to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Isn't that a great thing? And Hal said, all it takes is a simple prayer. Lord, thank you for what Christ did for me on the cross. Please accept his sin payment on my behalf and come live your life as my Lord. Yeah, amen to that. Okay, so that gives us kind of a feel for what Hal does and the kinds of things that he covers in this book. And we'll do more. This is the first podcast on that. We will do more later. But I like him as an individual. I like this book very much. And I hope it's been a benefit to you today. All right, take care.